Before we begin the proceedings today, I'd just like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, who are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that we meet today and that the University of Sydney is built upon. And as we share our own knowledge, teaching and learning and research practices within the university, I ask that we all also pay respects to the knowledge embedded forever in the Aboriginal custodianship of country. And with that, I'd just like to open the session by also introducing the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre to those of you who've not been to one of our events before. We like to refer to ourselves by the acronym SEAC. We have 220 academics working on a variety of Southeast Asia related projects at the University of Sydney, which is the highest concentration of regional expertise in the world. And the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre was established specifically to capitalise on this wide-ranging expertise. We run a number of seminars and sessions on a variety of topics related to Southeast Asia. So if you are interested in our centre, I ask that you go to our website and join, become a member, and you can be on our mailing list and find out about future events. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Wong Chen to our university today to give us some thoughts and insight on the current political situation in Malaysia. Wong Chen is a Malaysian Member of Parliament for Kelana Jaya. He is a self-described policy wonk who chaired and co-wrote the alternative Pakatan Raya budget for 2015. He's also a former corporate lawyer and the chairman of the Investment and Trade Bureau of Anwar Ibrahim's party, the People's Justice Party. So with that, I'd like to ask him to come up to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to Sydney Southeast Asia Centre for hosting this event, and thank you to all of you for attending it. And a big thank you to all the Malaysians that participated in Bersih 4 recently in Sydney. You did a good number of about 1,000 people, I heard. Now, I've prepared my text this time. The last speech I gave in Hong Kong was a bit off the cuff and nearly gave my lawyer a heart attack. And we're here to talk about 1MDB, and the 1MDB issue is a bit tricky. So I have to be very, very careful, and the government is extremely sensitive at this moment, whatever we talk about on 1MDB. So I'm just going to try my best to read the text. It's about 20-25 minutes, and then later we can open up everything and just talk any subject matter that you wish to. Okay, let's start this now with. I'll start with a joke actually. The only good thing to come out of 1MDB is the jokes that you get on a daily basis on your emails and WhatsApp. Now, this is my favorite 1MDB joke. Last week, when I was clearing up my Gmail space, I looked through my old 2013 emails, and at the spam section, I discovered a very strange email addressed to me. It reads like this: Dear Mr. Wong, I desire to go into an honest business deal with you. I believe you are reasonable and trustworthy. Therefore, I must not hesitate to confide in you this sincere business. My name is Prince Tariq Al-Jelo. Wow. I'm the only son of the late Sultan Al-Jelo, who was killed by rebels that attacked my country. I managed to escape to Singapore, from where I am now contacting you. Before the death of my father, he told me that he had deposited a sum of $680 million kept in Singapore under the codename Falcon. I seek your assistance to first allow me to transfer you the $680 million to your personal bank account. Please declare this to the authorities that this is a donation, and trust me, all will be fine. 4 months later, you will transfer back $650 million back to me in Singapore. You can keep the $30 million, and I promise you, this money is legitimate and will be used to fight ISIS. Thank you, and God bless you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lesson here. That lesson is very simple. Don't immediately reject a Nigerian scam letter. Now, the sad thing to this is, my little Nigerian joke is not far off from the bizarre and comical explanations the government and politicians from UMNO have given on the 1MDB scandal. My thought my talk today, I've got about 20 plus minutes. I will give a simple nutshell summary of what 1MDB is. It's a complicated subject matter with layers of companies, and it's lots of actors involved. You know, you've got movie stars and stuff like that. But I'll try to give a nutshell, simple summary of it. So I'll do that first, and then I'll focus on 3 basic issues. The first one is, how can such a thing happen in Malaysia? That's the first one. Second is, what are the differences between this scandal and all previous Malaysian financial scandals? And the third one, why has Najib taken such drastic actions, and what it means to the Malaysian economy and also our already fragile democracy. Now the summary. The 1MDB financial scandal in a nutshell is about a company set up, wholly owned by the government, borrowing some 42 billion ringgit, or about 10 billion ringgit, 10 billion US dollars, buying a whole bunch of stuff. So it's quite simple. It's just a company set up, borrowed a lot of money, and went on a spending spree. However, the things that 1MDB bought could not generate enough cash flow to service its debt. So it's got all these debts it could not service. It bought a lot of things. So by 2015, 1MDB was facing a cash flow crunch, and it needed a bailout. There were a lot of side issues on overtly generous payments to Goldman Sachs, amounting to 500 million US dollars in fees. There were complaints that some of the assets that 1MDB bought were old power plants and land in Penang that were overpriced. But the most troubling issue is the allegations that liabilities and assets do not tally. Now, this allegation means that a big chunk of the money had just disappeared, and therefore by implication was siphoned off by parties unknown. So 1MDB is a company very heavily in debt, with inflated assets, and possibly a whole lot of missing money. The government insisted that there is no problem whatsoever, then all is needed is time and some help for 1MDB to reorganize and to sort out its cash flow. But under tremendous opposition pressure, we've been pressuring the Prime Minister for some time now, since 2013 in fact, the Prime Minister eventually reluctantly agreed to allow the Central Bank, the Police, the Attorney General, the Auditor General, the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee and Anti-Corruption Agency, known as MECC, to start investigations. Then, the Wall Street Journal story broke in July, and the Wall Street Journal reported movements of very large amounts of money in 2013, some 680 million, into the Prime Minister's personal bank account. This immediately raised concerns of cross-border money laundering and corruption issues. And because the US 680 million transfer was made less than 2 months before the general elections in 2013, concerns were raised about election money and also influence peddling. Now, at the same time, there were talks later on that the investigators were doing a little bit too well in the investigation. And as a result, several executives from 1MDB, this is a fact, just disappeared. They were requested to turn up to the MECC office. They requested to turn up at Bank Negara. They just disappeared. Now, sensing something amiss, the Prime Minister dramatically on 28 July, as most of you know, sacked the Deputy Prime Minister, who was a bit critical, not very critical, just a bit critical on 1MDB, and the Attorney General. Now, removing the Attorney General is the most important thing that he did, in actual fact. So Najib also changed the head of the special branch of the police. Suddenly, several investigators themselves were called up by the police and investigated upon. Najib also successfully disrupted the Public Accounts Committee, the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, by promoting 4 PAC members to ministerial posts. Now, it was a dramatic day, that capped the whole event, and when a fire broke out on 2 floors on the police headquarters, apparently simultaneously breaking out on 2 floors itself. And the cause of the fire was concluded by the fire department, the Malaysian fire department, to have been caused by fire. In Malay, the explanation on Twitter was, punca kebakaran adalah daripada api. So, the Wall Street Journal was explained by some low-level UMNO members as a donation, the money, the 2.6 billion. But finally, the Deputy Prime Minister confirmed that it was a donation by a Middle East country to reward Malaysia for fighting ISIS. It doesn't matter that at a material time in 2013, when the donation was made, ISIS has yet to declare its Islamic State status. It also boggles the mind, why would a donor give money to Najib's personal bank account when it's supposedly to reward Malaysia for fighting ISIS? So I think it's fair to say that my Nigerian joke at the start is as plausible, if not more, than the Deputy Prime Minister's version. So there it is. There is where we are now at. So far it's had a lot of twists and turns. It's like what I'll describe as a Mexican telenovela. So now let's do the first question. Now this is an academic setting, so we'll try to be slightly academic. How can such a thing happen? In order for a scandal of such magnitude to take place, you need two things to be aligned. In the same way, you need two hands to clap. First, the group of persons motivated to benefit from such a scandal. In other words, the alleged masterminds have to be there. The other is the people inside 1MDB, entrusted to protect the fund, were either compromised or extremely negligent in discharging their duties. Now, the alleged mastermind is a flamboyant young man called Jolo. Most of you know about him. Jolo just happens to be good friends with Riza Aziz, the stepson of the Prime Minister. Jolo was also recently asked by the anti-corruption agency to appear before them to help in investigations. On the other side, within 1MDB, you got senior executives that have disappeared. The central bank has issued wanted posters for two individuals, Casey Tang and Jasmine Liu, to help out with investigations. The anti-corruption agency has also asked for Nick Faisal and Datuk Subo Yassin to help with investigations. These two are also missing. The fact that senior executives and key witnesses have disappeared imply that some serious problems exist in 1MDB and its dealings. At the board of advisor or board of directors level, there are two levels here. We have very, very famous personalities, including the French tycoon Bernard Arnault of Louis Vuitton, LVMH, of which the Prime Minister's wife is fixated with their product, in particular the Birkin bags. So what you have in 1MDB at the board and management level, I mean Nick Faisal and Jasmine Liu and Casey Tang, they're brilliant young people. I mean they're professional people. They're not, they have degrees, they have experience in the workspace. So at that level, what you have is very bright, very successful and capable people. So how is it possible for a scandal of such magnitude to occur in an organization that seemingly looks on the surface to be solid and utterly respectable? Now this is the first question we have to ask ourselves. The academic explanation to this lies in the fact that there is a patronage system with a culture of impunity that has become the dominant model of corporate Malaysia. 1MDB being a corporation, at the bottom line is just a corporation, is thus infused and also trapped within this culture. That's your academic explanation on this matter. Now, you have to read the groundbreaking book by Professors Jomo and Terence Gomez. The book is called Malaysia's Political Economy. It describes the origin of corporate patronage system in the 1980s in detail. And in the mid-1980s to the roaring 1990s, some of you may remember before you moved yourself in exile in Australia from economic crisis. In the roaring 1990s, during that time, Dr. Mahathir had this brilliant idea or a vision to build corporate Malaysia at a breakneck speed via privatization and corporatization activities. These economic boom years were initially driven by meritocracy. Believe me, the early tycoons were quite very capable people, where a bunch of very bright people were given unlimited opportunities to make fortunes. However, this cozy support system evolved and later consolidated into big business loyal to UMNO and Barisan Nasional. Then later on came the politicians with contracts for their relatives, where it became a system of corporate nepotism. In a short space of less of a decade and a bit more, who you know became more important than what you know. People who had no knowledge, no vision, no business skills whatsoever became multi-millionaires, billionaires for being sons and daughters of politicians. This, in essence, was the corporate patronage system that Dr. Mahathir left to the country when he retired. As for the concept of corporate impunity, history has shown that for every financial scandal Malaysia has had to endure, almost nobody has ever been successfully prosecuted. Getting scot-free despite losing millions and millions and hundreds of millions became the norm. Academic scholars will also explain that the feudalistic nature of Malaysian modern society allows for something like 1MDB to happen. So on the surface, what you have is a modern so-called strategic fund with clever people. But in practice, good governance has been subverted by patronage culture. There are reasons to support this academic view because in practice, and this I give my personal view, in Parliament we see it all the time, that when the Prime Minister makes a decision in Cabinet, none of the Cabinet members or senior members in Barisan Nasional ever dare to stand up to say otherwise. So what we have here is we have a collective paralysis of ministers, senior ministers in Cabinet. So when the Wall Street Journal story broke, in particular that particular story, it was just astounding to see none of them making any comment other than the Deputy Prime Minister. The same way the government-linked companies' executives have also learned to carry out orders without questioning, because this is a culture set by the politicians. Now, to illustrate the point about directors and executives in government companies, 1MDB, you must remember, is a government company. I wish to point out one aspect of the 1MDB story. This was in 2009. Two reputable senior directors of some stature resigned from 1MDB board. These two were Azlan Zaino and Muhammad Bakir Saleh. Azlan Zaino, some of you may know, was the EPF boss, a very well-respected manager. And Bakir Saleh from Sime Darby, he too has quite a decent reputation. Now, both left 1MDB abruptly in 2009. And you must know that 2009 is the year that 1MDB started doing business. So they left because of the 1MDB Petro-Saudi joint venture deal. I won't go into the details of it, it's a bit complicated. But it's suffice to say that the joint venture is dodgy, from so many aspects. As a corporate lawyer, I looked at it. There was just no due diligence done at the financial level nor the legal level. No decent due diligence done. It was reported in the Star newspaper that the reasons why both left 1MDB was because money from the Petro-Saudi deal, totaling $700 million was diverted to another company. And when these two directors stood up and said, please return the money back, they were ignored, they tendered their resignation. So when good people resign, it just tells you that the organization has a warped corporate culture. Now the big problem is this, is that those people that did not resign, those board of directors that seemingly agreed that money can be diverted to another company, that lacked governance issues, they went on to run this company for the next 6 years. So that is the problem with 1MDB. Yeah? Now the second point I want to address is to point out the differences between the 1MDB scandal and all previous financial scandals that Malaysia has had to endure. Malaysia, as you know, had a lot of financial scandals, most of it ironically during Dr. Mahathir's rule. Ironic because today Dr. Mahathir is the chief critic of Najib and 1MDB. Financial scandals are sometimes unavoidable if a government sets high economic policy targets and then chooses the wrong people to quickly pursue such policy goals. And during Dr. Mahathir's rule, he was a man in quite a bit of a hurry to industrialize Malaysia. He was also a man impressed by doers, or people that can do things. And the type of rough and tumble businessman who did things quickly and do not have much time for rules. Now, for an Australian equivalent, Alan Bond actually comes to mind. So that's the type of people that Dr. Mahathir really liked. So in the early 1980s, we had the Forex scandal, where Bank Negara speculated on foreign currencies and lost a spectacular 10 billion. I mean, some people argue that's actually more than that. 10 billion in the 1980s, today's present value is about 35 billion. So it's not far from the whole 1MDB, yardstick. The Carrion BMF scandal saw about $1 billion of bad loans made to a very dodgy Hong Kong company. Then we had the Pavaja Steel, the Mars bailout, then the Port Klang Financial, the Free Zone, PKFZ. Essentially, the difference between 1MDB scandal and all other previous financial scandals is that in all previous scandals, Malaysia used real money. Malaysia had discovered oil and gas in the 70s, and in the 1980s and 1990s, we were flush with stupid but real money. When I mean real money, I mean they were not loans, they were not borrowings, they were not bonds, they were real money from the government coffers. Excess money, mostly from oil, were available for economic projects and investments. And in the case of 1MDB, there were no real money. To start off, they just borrowed They borrowed in terms of mostly in bonds and short-term loans. And 1MDB borrowed everything on the implicit and explicit guarantees of the federal government. When we lost all the money in the Forex deal in the 1980s by Dr. Mahathir, we didn't borrow. We lost money in Perwaja, we didn't borrow. We lost money in Carrion, we did not borrow. The second startling difference between previous scandals and 1MDB is in the old scandals, you could actually link money to assets purchased and to an economic national interest policy. In the case of the Forex foray, we know where the money was lost. It was lost on the trading floor. It was speculating currencies, of course, not a good thing to do by any standard, what more by the central bank and also by the government. But the intention back then was to try to build up the Malaysian reserves. So it had a particular economic objective. Now, Perwaja Steel, I mean, it's a big scandal. It was clearly an expensive misadventure, but the clear intention or economic policy was to build up a national steel industry to help power Malaysia's industrialization policy. PKFZ, everybody laugh about it, but it had a real purpose, which was to create Malaysia or transform Malaysia into a regional distribution hub for transit between import and export of import and export transactions. Now, all previous financial scandals had specific economic policies to justify their existence. 1MDB is different. It doesn't have any real or specific national economic objective for its existence. 1MDB says in its mission statement, and it is like this, to drive sustainable economic development by forging strategic global partnerships and promoting FDI. I mean, this is really woolly. And, it's too wide of a mission statement. Sustainable development, strategic global partnerships, promoting foreign direct investments. So behind all these woolly statements that the government has put up to justify 1MDB, in practice, it had no real economic objective or national economic objective. It is just another government fund, and in its own memorandum of association, the document that incorporates them, it is controlled by the Prime Minister. It states there specifically to invest in anything that he chooses. So let's see, what did he invest the 42 billion that he borrowed for? We know that 1MDB invested in a variety of stuff. It initially invested in an oil exploration joint venture that later became a loan. It was alleged that they invested in a coal mine in Mongolia. We don't know what this fixation in Mongolia is about. We also know that they were given land, very cheap in KL, prime land, and then they also overpaid for land in Penang, not so prime land in Penang. And I think the only successful in inverted, venture that they went into was to buy some really old and decrepit power plants, which at least provided them some constant cash flow. Now, most of Malaysians' previous financial scandals involved inflated pricing or markups, right? Where the brokers made a lot of money and the patrons behind these brokers became very rich. It's the tried and tested model favored by many Malaysian politicians. Believe me, this markup model. And recently in Melbourne, we saw the big Mara scandal. That is the model being used, the markup model. It's completely illegal to mark up, of course, I'm not condoning it. But under this corrupt model, at least you still get to see an asset. That's the difference. Yeah? For example, in the Perwaja Steel scandal, we lost a lot of money, but there is a power plant there. You can go and see the power plant in Perwaja Steel. And when the Melbourne deal, they actually bought properties in Melbourne, right? But in the 1MDB case, now this is the major difference. There are very serious allegations by many parties, including Dr. Mahathir, that a chunk of the money had just simply disappeared. Money that cannot be linked to any asset purchased. Remember that 1MDB had no money to start with, so it was all borrowed. So when borrowed money disappeared, everybody panics, including the bankers and the bondholders. Now, according to The Edge, the respected financial weekly, which is now currently suspended, the unaccounted for money is somewhere between 17.9 billion to 25.5 billion ringgit. 1MDB tried to rebut this allegation by revealing that they had invested somewhere close to 15.4 billion in three parties, a company called Brazen Sky, 1MDB Global Investment Funds, and ABA Investment Deposits. And then they also spent another 5.8 billion on working capital and financing costs. Now, what they've declared, what they've revealed, because the Edge alleged that money is missing. So they said, no, it's not missing, it's all here. Yeah. So 15.4 is with these 3 companies, and additional 5.8 is for working capital and financing costs. So that totals up to about 21.2 billion. No further details were given on how these investments have performed, or what did the funds buy. And if only 1MDB invested 15.4 billion in say Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, there will be no issue at all today, right? Instead, they invested in companies that nobody knows about. Who is Brazen Sky? What did Brazen Sky how is it that Brazen Sky deserves 6.1 billion of investment? And this is a lot of money, right? It turns out that Brazen Sky is yet another 1MDB fund. So what you have is a fund within a fund. So managing the Brazen Sky fund is a company called Bridge Partners, a Hong Kong-based investment company that has no visible track record. So this is what we have. 1MDB, Brazen Sky, managed by Bridge Partners, and the custodian to the fund managed by Bridge Partners is an account in a Swiss private bank. 1MDB Global Investment Fund, which receive another chunk of a few billion, is also another fund within a fund. As for ABA Investment Deposit, we had a comical explanation from the deputy minister, that the deposit there is not in the form of cash, but units. Units of what? Nobody knew. But in Parliament a few months ago, we had a fun time where we suggested to the minister perhaps they should take these units and try and hawk it to the world and try to pay off the national debt with it. He didn't take the idea too well. As for the working capital or finance costs, no breakdown was given. How can you spend 5.8 billion on working capital and finance costs? That's just astounding. Yeah, in 5 years of operation. I mean, it raises the question: Did 1MDB have offices with gold taps and gold toilet seats? I mean, what were they doing? 5.8 billion is a lot of money. So the 1MDB's attempt to rebut Dr. Mahathir's and the Edge's accusations that the money had just disappeared had in fact raised a lot more questions. By using so many layers of companies, creating funds within a fund, the 1MDB structure is clearly not transparent. That much is true. Yeah? Most corporate advisors or financial forensic investigators will conclude immediately that 1MDB had possibly something very, very big to hide. Now, what are they hiding? What are they possibly hiding? And why are they possibly hiding it? Yeah, my lawyer told me to use the word possibly a lot, in case I get sued. So if this whole 1MDB saga was a question of bad management or bad investment policy, the government should have just admitted it, recover what you can, sell off the bits that you've lost money in, find the people that were the culprits doing all this negligent work, and move on, But it's not so easy, because the issue is something else. The issue is something more basic. That this is not about bad investments in the sophisticated world of complex high finance. That this is not a story about deep patronage system or some sophisticated political academic musing about the nature of Malaysian feudal political system. Maybe this is about something much more basic than that, something more primal. I'll explain this later at the end of my speech. This brings us neatly to the last issue. In this last few minutes, I'd like to try to provide an explanation as to why Najib has taken such actions in the last 2 months. That's where the big activity happened, the last 2 months. I will also conclude by discussing what the implications are to Malaysia's politics and the constitution. So why did Najib do what he did? Simply put, he had no choice. That's the truth. The scandal had just become too big to contain. When it was in Malaysia, it was okay, right? But when it took on an international dimension, and it took on an international dimension in a very bad way. In a bad way because he had all the juicy tabloid stuff. You had Jolo, who was partying with Paris Hilton, hanging out with Leonardo DiCaprio. So he had all that tabloid bits, right? And it also appealed to all these Financial Times readers, all the stuffy bankers. They loved it as well, because the money that they paid to Goldman Sachs, that $500 million fees, is like, it's like the big Wall Street story. It's the big Wall Street success story. I mean, the 1MDB story was unlucky for Najib. It's like a modern day Great Gatsby. That's what it is. So he couldn't get away from this. And then when the big kahuna came around with the Wall Street Journal story, the 2.6 billion, everybody knows about this, the donation story. Yeah, the key is this. it appears that Rupert Murdoch, through the Wall Street Journal, has essentially declared fair game on Najib. And I don't have to tell you who Rupert Murdoch is and what his impact is in politics around the world. Yeah? And this also, the latest being that the Swiss authorities have announced that they have also begun investigations on 1MDB dealings, whether money that went through several Swiss bank accounts was sourced from corrupt activities. So what you have is the external global pressures have come home to Malaysia to roost. His foreign PR agencies and spin masters could not contain the matter anymore internally, right? So Najib had no choice but to answer the Rakyat, and he reluctantly agreed to allow the civil servants to commence investigations into 1MDB. By starting the investigation, I think he wanted to buy time from us because we were hounding him, the members of parliament from the opposition, right? So that he can go around and say, look, there's an investigation going on. You can't ask any more questions. That was, I think, his basic strategy. But he needed to count on one thing, and that one thing is the loyalty of civil servants. But I think he probably misread the whole thing because there's been a lot of grumblings from the civil service. Many are extremely fed up with the high cost of living, the stagnant economy, and many felt ashamed by the 1MDB scandal, with all the tabloid juicy stuff tarnishing the country's reputation. Many civil servants, senior civil servants in particular, are very proud and nostalgic of Dr. Mahathir's achievements. And when Dr. Mahathir publicly attacked Najib, loyalties were divided and camps were formed. It also did not help Najib's shaky standing with the civil service when the police started investigating the investigators. I mean, the 1MDB investigators, to be fair to them, they are not politicians. They don't have a real political agenda. They're just civil servants doing their job. The implications of all these happenings are far-reaching to the constitution and also to Malaysian politics. At the executive level, at the level of the Prime Minister, he has shown a willingness to exercise his executive powers with total disregard to rules and to Parliament. And that is far-reaching implication. We're dealing with a mini Dr. Mahathir, that's willing to go the extra mile to make life difficult for everybody. At the administrative level, as I said earlier, the civil servants are clearly upset, and rightly so. And they're possibly fighting back because you can see some of these MACC officers, some of these officers from Bank Negara, they've just made a defiant stand against the Prime Minister. I mean, Governor Zati, in her first public appearance on 1MDB, after she was in hospital for 6 days, she came out and then she made this public appearance. She said that she's willing to testify and tell the truth to the PAC when PAC sits again in October. Yeah? So what was once the bastion and the political power base for UMNO, questions are now being raised how these 1.5 million civil servants will vote in the next election. There is also talks that the members of parliament from both sides are working together to vote Najib out of office. On the side of opposition, I can publicly state our position that we are willing to support any vote of no confidence against him. In response, we've been called many things, including plotters. Malaysia is probably the only country where members of parliament who wants to pursue a vote of no confidence in parliament are under police watch as possible plotters attempting to subvert parliamentary democracy. That's how far we've gone. Internally, what are the implications in UMNO and within Barisan Nasional? It now appears that UMNO as a political party is stuck. It cannot change. It doesn't have the courage to remove a very, very unpopular Prime Minister. The party is also beholden to, or it has to be, beholden to and continues to prop up Najib. That fact is an astounding declaration. It is a public proclamation that the current crop of UMNO leaders are suffering from a severe case of collective redundancy of courage. This also means that the patronage system started and used by Dr. Mahathir so skillfully is now the single biggest problem within UMNO. And when the center that is UMNO can no longer hold, things will fall apart. All the component partners in Barisan Nasional are starting to agitate. MIC and MC have been called irrelevant by certain outspoken UMNO members. It is also not accidental that the people from the Borneo states of Sabah and Sarawak are calling for more autonomy, and some even demanding independence. Lastly, what are the implications for the opposition? Now, what started as a pin that we used to gleefully prick the conscience of the Prime Minister back in 2009, the 1MDB scandal has now transformed itself into a weapon like a sledgehammer. And in the last 6 months, Najib has taken his own sledgehammer and whacked us with it by passing more draconian laws in Parliament, using the Sedition Act to silence us, and doing such ridiculous things as banning yellow t-shirts recently. As Najib finds himself more and more cornered, our lives as opposition members of Parliament have become exponentially more dangerous. Now, to conclude my speech, I want to declare again and again that I'm an optimist. You have to become a politician in Malaysia. I believe in Malaysians. I think Malaysians, we are, most of us here are Malaysians. We are a funny lot. I mean, we have a lot of problems with racial identities, religious issues. But I think deep down in us, all of us have this innate sense of fairness. What is right and what is wrong, we know, right? And I think it's that sense of fairness that will pull us through this crisis. And just to round up, 1MDB is not a story about race politics. It's not, actually it's quite funny because there's a lot of Chinese in 1MDB as well as Malays and Indians, right? So it's really not about race politics. It's not about a screwed up political or corporate patronage system. It's not really about that. You can point to the origins, how something like 1MDB can happen, but you can't really blame Dr. Mahdi for everything. In the final analysis, 1MDB may just be something more basic, nothing super sophisticated or complicated, something primal and as basic as theft. And I'm sure all Malaysians, whether you're a civil servant or UMNO minister or you're an opposition sympathizer, we are all in agreement that it is wrong to steal. And those who stole must be brought to justice. Thank you very much.